In this news roundup of the week, as Boris Johnson falters, momentum is growing for a new populist campaign to bring down net zero with him. President Biden's administration is under fire for allegedly trying to push its ideology into institutions where it doesn't belong, and from Canada to Austria, the fallout from attempted vaccine mandates continues. My name's Mallen Baker, this is the Mallen Baker Show. In the UK, the forces of populism are reportedly gathering their strength, ready for a push to turn the Brexit voting masses against net zero and to demand that the policy objective be put to a national referendum vote. Nigel Farage is said to be, quote, in very serious discussions about launching a campaign for a net zero referendum. This comes after late last year he told GB News' audience that a referendum on green taxes could well be my latest campaign. Farage's musings come as the rebranded Global Warming Policy Forum campaign, Net Zero Watch, has continued to focus on the alleged costs of net zero, such as this ad here, suggesting that net zero will force churches to close. And I say alleged, being quite clear, for there is a case to be made. It seems entirely arguable that the current proponents of net zero have not been fully scrupulous and frank about the real costs of some of the proposed policies. Nevertheless, the net zero campaign statements to date seem rather at ease with exaggerating and slightly loosely attributing effects to the policy. There are a number of reasons why we have an energy crisis right now. It's a situation that badly applied net zero policies could definitely worsen, but it doesn't readily stand up that they have much contributed to the current problems. What about the idea of pushing a referendum on net zero? Well, if you believe their polling, 42% of the public currently support the idea. But polling commissioned by campaign groups is notoriously subject to slanted questions to get the result that they want. A different YouGov poll found that 62% of the UK public think the UK should be one of the most ambitious countries when it comes to climate change, regardless of what other countries do. But the point really isn't what people think now. The question is whether or not there's enough dry tinder lying around the place that a populist match could set it all alight. Could a Farage-fronted campaign to take the cost of living crisis that's going to be with us for the next year and blame it on climate policy, could that be effective in getting people to regard the so-called green blob in the same way that they came to regard the European Commission? And the answer to that has to be maybe. Given the alienating tactics of groups like Extinction Rebellion, with their actions that often target ordinary working people trying to go about their business, and given the current government incompetence in producing policies with little apparent awareness or concern for their consequences on people, only to then U-turn on them at the last minute when half the damage has already been done, and given the absence of any strong campaigning on behalf of mainstream, not fringe, mainstream net zero policies, it's entirely possible that such a shift could be achieved. It would require effective campaigning, and that certainly isn't a given based on recent history. And this all takes a sharper edge right now because of the ongoing death spiral of the Prime Minister Boris Johnson, which has continued this week. I said a couple of weeks ago that rebels might decide to stay their hand, knowing full well that Boris Johnson would give them new opportunities because he just can't help himself. And that sentiment was dramatically confirmed this week when he inflicted yet another wound upon himself by bizarrely accusing the leader of the opposition of having been complicit in police failure to prosecute the notorious child abuser Jimmy Savile. This was because Keir Starmer was the Director of Public Prosecutions for a while during that time, even though there is no evidence or suggestion he was ever involved in any such decisions. This was widely condemned as going beyond the usual cut and thrust of politics, and when he failed to apologise, even as he was forced to backtrack on the statement, it led to one of his most trusted aides, Munira Mirza, quitting with a stinging resignation letter. That then saw 3 other members of the Number 10 staff resign, although unlike Mirza, those were probably ones who knew they were imminently about to be thrown under the bus anyway, because of so-called Partygate. And then this morning, Friday, started with news of another one going, and it's one of those situations that could see events spiralling out of control and leading quickly to a final end. Or it could be just another minor moment on the descent, another debilitating cut of 1,000 cuts. And this becomes relevant to the net zero question because the opponents of net zero are keenly aware of the opportunity here. Boris Johnson has been firmly committed to the programme, but the 2 names most commonly held to be front-runners to replace him have a history of being decidedly more lukewarm. Chancellor Rishi Sunak has generally avoided talking about it and has annoyed environmentalists by cutting air passenger duty on domestic flights and a freeze on petrol duty in the last budget. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss opposed the UK's bid to host COP26 in the first place and reportedly wasn't much bothered about even turning up there, which is curious for a Foreign Secretary. Another recent resignee, Lord Frost, the former Brexit minister, who has become a significant influence within the party, also has targeted the cost of net zero as one of his complaints about the administration. So you can see how the populist debate is going to unfold. Another highly influential rebel, Steve Baker MP, said that net zero is likely to dominate the next Tory leadership election. Net zero is going to hit everyone, and it's especially going to hit the poor. That means I believe it's going to be bigger than Brexit, it's going to be bigger than the poll tax. You can probably take that as a statement of intent rather than a neutral prediction, given that Steve Baker is an active leader of the Net Zero Watch group within the Conservatives in Parliament. Another taste of the messaging from the talk radio host Julia Hartley-Brewer. The problem of rising energy prices won't be solved by the government giving us handouts of our own money. We need to abandon the insanity of net zero and end years of failed energy policies. So that's how the battle lines are being drawn. I don't think the climate establishment have entirely clocked it yet, but right now I would say all bets are off on how this will go. The point is that if Boris Johnson is finally brought down, his would-be successors would want to be able to draw a strong line between them and the now hugely unpopular Johnson. It could certainly be the case that they could focus on the most expensive and difficult net zero commitments as a way to do this. You can see that reflected in the story that came out today that senior cabinet ministers are arguing that there should be a net zero rethink in government in light of the cost of living crisis. They argue that the pace of change behind the energy switch is too fast, and there are certainly some good arguments for that. That said, there are others who suggest that the vocal minority should not be overestimated. So Anthony Brown, elected in 2019 as a Conservative MP, a former environment editor of the Times of London, said that he had been surprised by the wide level of support for net zero in the parliamentary party, and he told Politico this: I think there was a lot more political cynicism in the Conservative Party in the Cameron era about the whole climate change agenda that has now largely evaporated. And he added that Tories can't just leave the issue to the left. Sam Hall, director of the Conservative Environment Network, added this: the broad majority of the Conservative Parliamentary Party is supportive of net zero. The opinion polling is clear that the public wants action on climate, and the economic case for action on climate change gets stronger every day, with falling technology costs and the green jobs that come in. The point is that the candidates for party leader won't be running against Nigel Farage to be elected by the Brexit voters of the country. He or she will be seeking the support of parliamentary colleagues. If there's a majority amongst that group for net zero, then it's unlikely to be a campaign focus, or certainly not one that leaps to the rhetorical extremes. Candidates may stress that they'll tackle the difficult areas with more time, more consideration. They're unlikely to turn against the whole project. Ultimately, if Johnson goes down, it's not going to be because of net zero, it's going to be because of his character flaws, his inability to tell the truth about just about anything, and his disregard for standards of probity that he apparently believes applies to everyone else but not to himself. The leadership election will focus therefore on character and trustworthiness more than any specific policy question, whatever the opponents of net zero would like to achieve. To change that, the populist campaigners would have to be successful in getting it to stick in people's heads that their financial problems today are because of environmental policy, and that such policy is not needed because the environment is not in imminent danger. Which is probably exactly why Nigel Farage is considering his options and pondering whether he might be the one to do that. Meanwhile, in the US, President Biden is getting serious kickback on various nominations for public roles, where he's been accused of pushing climate change and anti-racism agendas into institutions where they don't belong. We'll come to that story in just a minute. But first, a new study came out this week saying that pandemic lockdowns failed spectacularly. The study, by academics associated with Johns Hopkins University, is a meta-analysis that says that lockdowns failed to reduce mortalities while increasing domestic violence and economic disruptions. Lockdown should be rejected out of hand, it concludes. Some of the long-standing lockdown skeptics have, of course, jumped on this as final proof and confirmation of what they've been saying all along. Mostly the mainstream media has been remarkably quiet about it. Now, let's be clear up front. I would love to believe that this is a highly robust study and its conclusions can be taken safely as fact. My general instinct, as I've narrated here in the past, is that the harm of lockdowns has not been factored into decision making, and the benefit of them is hard to see consistently and solidly in real world outcomes. But as I always say here, when you note that you're predisposed to believe something, that's exactly when you should question and scrutinise it more carefully. As Richard Feynman said, the trick is not to fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. So I'm putting off a video I was working on for next week, and instead I will be doing a rapid response to this question. What do we learn from this recent study about lockdowns? Is it robust? What other evidence do we have? It's been over a year since I last did a video looking at the evidence for whether or not lockdowns work, and we've seen quite a few more of them since then, and often with better data being collected along the way. So is it game over? Something we should learn from and never ever do ever again? Or are my preferences going to be challenged by the data, which is something that does happen from time to time? As I talk to you today, I don't know how that's going to shape up. Join me for the deep dive video going live on Monday next week to find out how it turns out. Do lockdowns work? What do we now know that we didn't know before? Going live at 7 p.m. UK time. Join me for that. The Biden administration's high-profile pledges to choose its candidate shortlists for office based on skin colour and sex has become a hotter area of contention in the US this week. Senate Republicans have been criticising the pre-announced intent that whoever the next Supreme Court judge was going to be, they would be black and female. The fact that, outside the political bubble, this is a remarkable thing to do was reflected in an ABC News Ipsos poll that found the overwhelming majority of Americans, 76%, believed that Biden should consider all possible nominees. Only 23% of respondents said that Biden should consider only nominees who are black women, as he has pledged to do. Republican Senator Susan Collins told ABC, "I believe that diversity benefits the Supreme Court, but the way that the president has handled this nomination has been clumsy at best. It adds to the further perception that the court is a political institution like Congress when it is not supposed to be." I think the charge of clumsiness carries a lot of weight. Indeed, one might well use stronger language than that. The politicisation of the Supreme Court has been a de facto reality for rather a long time, however, which is not a good thing, I agree. What people really worry about, as always, is about whether the supreme legal body will be used to push a nakedly political agenda. That's what Democrats accuse the Trump appointees of, and it's what Republicans now are flagging up in this case. This is then seeing an echo in likely Republican resistance to another Biden nominee, of Lisa Cook, to become the first black woman again to join the Federal Reserve Board. Lisa Cook is a Michigan State University professor who has a long career history of exploring the impact of racial injustice on the economy. The Fed has a growing research activity on race-related trends. Senator Pat Toomey said that it wasn't obvious how her work on racial issues related to the Fed's core mission. You can add that to a similar commentary about whether the administration is seeking to embed climate change action into the Fed's mission. So that debate extended to the confirmation hearing for Sarah Bloom Raskin, nominated for Vice Chair for Supervision and Regulation. Raskin insisted that she was focused on the Fed's core business. I understand Congress's strictures and authorities and have always acted within them, she said. But Mitch McConnell commented after the hearing that she intended to bully the private sector on climate change. So, for instance, Republicans focused again and again on some of her earlier statements, including an op-ed for the New York Times, where she criticised the Fed for changes to pandemic lending programs in ways that would benefit struggling oil and gas companies. She responded to those charges by saying the op-ed had been about an emergency lending program, not the standard supervisory process where it would be inappropriate for the Fed to make decisions based on choosing winners and losers. And that highlighted the serious debate here in terms of the functions of different aspects of the government. The government is committed to action on climate change and on racial inequality. Does that really mean that every institution has to have those topics put in as top priorities for their own work? Does that run the risk of taking the eye of those institutions off the rather important core missions that each of them has? Critics argue that the administration is taking an ideological approach that is completely blind to any of this context, that makes it more likely that what they will do will be inappropriate than not. Now, just because that's alleged doesn't necessarily make it true, but there is enough of a question mark to be justified in asking the question. Part of it comes back to the usual problem, unwittingly summarised by Mitch McConnell when he said this: President Biden's nominees for Fed Vice Chair wants unelected bureaucrats to financially bully the private sector into policy changes which lack enough support to become law the honest way. Well, he might be right on that, or it might be political hubris, but he ignores the reality of American politics, which is that it's almost impossible for either party when in government to get laws passed the honest way. Institutional gridlock prevents it. That's the main reason why you get administrations seeking to find ways around the rules to get things done. It's how people deal with broken and dysfunctional systems. Again, on both sides. Does that excuse it? Certainly not if, in the attempt, it undermines the integrity of the institutions that you're trying to force it through. And that is the focus of that debate right now. Now, in a minute, we will look at the fallout from vaccine mandates. But first, on Wednesday, I will be doing another update video, one of those where I look at some of the issues that I've covered here recently, and particularly what are the discussions and the debates that are going on in the public sphere around them. Who's saying interesting things? What new bits of evidence have come to light? Those episodes are always full of colour, fast-paced, and there's lots for us to discuss this month. So join me for that video. Going live Wednesday at 7 p.m. UK time. See you there. And if you've made it this far, surely it's time to do all the good stuff. You know, hit the like button. If you're not already, then hit the subscribe button and don't forget to ring the bell so you get notifications when new content goes live. If you prefer to listen rather than to watch, you can pick up the Friday News Roundup videos via podcast. Just search on my name in your podcast player of choice and subscribe to get episodes downloaded automatically every week. All right, onwards. Canada has been focused over the last couple of weeks on the emergence of a major protest by a significant group of truckers using their vehicles to make large-scale disruptive presence, having travelled in convoy from Vancouver to Ottawa. The protests were sparked by the Trudeau government's insistence that truckers crossing the US-Canada border would be required to be vaccinated or else would be required to quarantine and take COVID tests, a requirement that makes it pretty much impossible to work as a cross-border trucker. Now, around 10% of Canadian truckers are reportedly not vaccinated, presumably because they don't want to be. There's no doubt that the protesters are more on the right-leaning end of the trucker community, and the protests have attracted, as protests always do, some of the more visible extreme fringe elements. Nevertheless, Trudeau and some of the establishment figures seem to have gone to significant lengths to use those fringes to damn the whole group. Trudeau said that the truckers, quote, hold unacceptable views and are a small fringe minority. One might suggest that the unacceptable views comment was intended to apply to the tiny number of people who actually paraded genuine Nazi swastika flags. But it's not so clear that they were actually being that selective. A Washington Post cartoon, for instance, characterised the whole convoy as being fascist, which seems a remarkably provocative suggestion. Others argued that thanking people who keep goods moving into and out of your country by calling them fascist might not be a great idea. The cartoonist presumably took the point, because he deleted his tweet of the cartoon and instead posted this. I support all truckers. It's a tough job. I never drove a truck, but I loaded thousands before I became a cartoonist. I know so many truckers. They are all good people. I do not support this convoy. Elon Musk added his own distinctive contribution with a variety of tweets, including this one, taking a break from politics for a while. Here's a nice photo of trucks. The Canadian truckers aren't the only ones focusing on vaccine mandates. In Austria, the first actual population-wide vaccine mandate passed into law as promised. It means that unvaccinated people can be fined regularly if they continue to refuse the vaccine. Weirdly, it comes into force at the same time as restrictions on the unvaccinated, who had been in a full-on lockdown, are actually being eased. The unvaccinated, if they have had a recent test showing them to be negative, can now go back into shops, restaurants and hotels. And looking at the COVID-19 situation in Austria, you can't help but notice that the most recent Omicron wave seems to be peaking. And in any case, it seems to have had the same minimal impact in terms of actual deaths has been seen in many other places. So other than irritation with people who refuse to go along with the government's wishes, what is this mandate for right now? The vaccine mandate will expire in January 2024, although it can be ended earlier if the pandemic allows, which I would hope will be the case. Political analyst Thomas Hofer suggests that an Austrian approach would be in line with setting a strict rule but then not carrying it the whole way through. And he said this, even the government might think, OK, maybe in March or April it's not necessary anymore. But it depends on how the pandemic develops and if it comes back in the autumn and winter. In the meantime, and as you would expect, significantly sized protests have been ongoing against the measure, bringing together a spectrum of views, from those who are vaccinated themselves but oppose mandates, through to the people who say that the measures, quote, pave the way to totalitarianism in Austria. My attention was drawn to this article recently about Beryl, the 100-year-old volunteer with no plans to stop. I love this story for several reasons. One, because it speaks to my personal attitude. I have no intention of retiring, ever. My aim is to get so much satisfaction from what I do, it would never cross my mind to ever want to stop. Now, that doesn't have to come from your career, as Beryl demonstrates. She was able to latterly find a new role that she enjoyed after the career years were over. Just because your career has finished doesn't mean your purpose in life has to end. And that purpose can be defined by what you can contribute to others. 2, you might look at Beryl and think she looks like a very young 100. I mean, we would all be happy, wouldn't we, to be wearing the years that lightly if we're fortunate enough to reach that milestone. I have no evidence specific to Beryl, but I've certainly read studies in the past that suggest that remaining outwardly focused, intellectually engaged in life and physically active slows and reduces the effects of ageing. On average, those are averages. There will always be the equivalent of the man who smoked 40 a day and lived to a ripe old age. Every statistical probability curve has its outliers. There are no guarantees in life. But nevertheless, The use it or lose it principle applies. I think it's unlikely to be a coincidence that Beryl remains actively engaged and also looks young for her years. Ideally from that, I would draw the lesson that you should work your way into the mindset that says find the life's purpose that you will never want to stop delivering. The bigger mission that makes it all worthwhile. So when you finally drop dead one day, people will say, well, at least you died doing what you loved. If you can do that, that's fantastic. But as Beryl shows, you don't have to go all Mallen on this, seeking profound life purpose and being slightly pompous about it, I dare say. You can just take it on as part of your expectation at every stage of your life. Do something that provides service for others. If someone will pay you to do that, great. But if not, volunteer anyway, because what you get back from keeping your appetite for life is well worth the time and effort you put in. The people I see more focused on not giving anything away for free, they're mostly the people who spend all their time moaning about how hard done by they are and becoming old before their time, pains in everyone else's butt. You may not be in control of all the factors in your life. Everyone has hardships. Beryl started doing her volunteering after her husband died, and no doubt that was an incredibly difficult time for her. But as always, you define how you respond to these factors, and how you do that can be reflected in whether you age gracefully and contentedly or not. All right, just time to thank, as always, the excellent people who find another way to make an impact in the world by supporting this channel on Patreon. Without your support, I could not produce the videos that I do here, some of which, as you know, require significant time and research, some of which touch on topics that some find controversial and could at any time become a lightning rod for demonetization all the way to cancellation. It means that we can look at the important issues without fear nor favour, without pandering to the YouTube algorithm which rewards polarisation and is puzzled in the face of objective, non-partisan analysis. If you would like to join those wonderful people who support the independent, fact-focused and non-ideological content that I aim to produce here, please head on over to patreon.com/Mallen Baker. It is always appreciated. Either way, have a great week. My name is Mallen Baker. This is the Mallen Baker Show. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please share with anyone else you think would also enjoy it. Word of mouth is really important to us. And if you've not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? As the saying goes, that subscribe button won't smash itself.